All right, we're back. Nightmare Success, in and out listeners. It's where you come. What happens when your worst fear becomes reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, as you know, it seems to keep happening over and over. I've got just an incredible guest. It's Kandia Milton. You guys might have heard of him. He makes a statement that he doesn't know a life without being involved in politics. And when you listen to his story, you kind of get that. But I want to give a shout out to Sabrina Morgan because I wouldn't be connected with Candia, but for Sabrina, who's quite the little rock star in her own world in Kansas City, doing some incredible things. But Candia was connected with me, and I connected with Candia, and so excited about it because his background. When you talk, he's born and raised in Detroit. And he had some incredible, he's a guy of action. He was a deputy chief of staff in Detroit, and then he was the chief of staff, and he's deputy mayor in Detroit. He was a mayor for a little while in Detroit. But he ended up serving some time over a land deal with the city. And we were just talking about this. He got an incredible opportunity, but he was able to take advantage of that opportunity when he got out to work in the congressional office of someone who believed in him and believed in second chances, but actually, put their money where their mouth was and gave him a second chance, which is fantastic. It's one of those things where you so much appreciate those opportunities that come to you after you've experienced being locked away. And one of the great things he's done is his passion's become reforming the criminal justice system. And, I always, I probably like a broken record on this. Those people who have been in the criminal justice system, they're the ones that need to have their seat at the table because they actually know what's broken and they can help the people who don't know what's broken. But right now, Kandia is the policy director for dream.org, which is a fantastic organization. If you don't know what it is, you probably have heard of it, but go to the website. It's unreal what this organization is doing and how they're doing it. But Kandia is the policy director or justice charged with working with state and federal officials to make policy changes that will impact the criminal justice system. I can't wait to unpack all this with Kandia. Before we do that, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes going and spending a couple of weekends walking the car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in a dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. And I'm not talking down dentist. If anybody wants a dentist, go to see Eddie Logan out in O'Fallon. He'll take care of you. But there's a better way. Take away all the pain and hassle of getting a car. Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they will go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them that Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Kandia Milton, welcome in. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing well, Brent. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion this morning.
Well, I tell you, I have been looking forward to this, and we were just talking about we've got a few things in common. You actually were a better basketball player because you actually played that, in college. But we have wives and 3 daughters, so we know the world of just being told where to go, what to do, and how to do it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I'm looking at myself in the picture here, and I see my head nodding yes. I just think it's just a habit right now. Having three daughters and a wife is, whatever they say is what it is. I learned to say yes.
So I was watching. I can't even remember what it was. There was a interview you did, and you were talking about in your life, Kandia, growing up as a kid, you didn't know anything around your world but politics. I think your mom, I mean, right after you were born, she was taking you out and putting you on the hip and signing up people. And tell us a little bit about growing up as Kandia.
Yeah, It's interesting, Brett, because I do tell this story often. I don't know a life, as you mentioned, without politics. And my mom tells the story that, I'm born July 24th, right? 1971. And the primaries are in early August. And she said, we were right out there on a poll, encouraging folks to vote for a particular candidate. And ever since then, I've been in politics. We would, I know politics, sports, and school. I mean, that was my life growing up. And so,
Kandia, was your life in, were mom, dad, siblings, like how did that all work within your world?
yeah, so my mom and dad divorced early. Certainly I was 5 years old when they divorced. My father, though, was an active participant in my life. But I always say I grew up in community. Yes, I had, a brother, two step brothers. And I can tell you the entire community was my family. In fact, we all played on the same baseball team. We all played on the same basketball teams. We all played on the same football teams and floor hockey teams. And so we were, it was, I grew up in community. And as our summers, we would have our baseball game, right? Or we would have baseball practice. And from the baseball diamond all the way back to our neighborhood, the entire team would go door to door for a particular candidate. Right.
That's great.
and so we were always trying to dodge it, but it was inevitable because we had to get back home, right? So my mom would have us go door to door, dropping literature for a candidate. So when I say I don't know a life without politics and it being intertwined in my very fabric and being, that was my life growing up. And so it stands to reason that I continue to work in that space. I say that I work at the intersection of policy and politics at this, as a career right now.
Yeah, so true. You had to be pretty good in the sport of basketball to go on and play in the next level. Was that in your family? Had anybody done that?
Yeah, interestingly enough, my grandfather, played college basketball at what was then Wayne University. Now it's Wayne State University. And he was, he was a coach beyond that. In fact, he was a coach and mentor. He's in Wayne State University's Hall of Fame as a contributor. So not only is he there for basketball, but he was the first African-American vice president of student affairs at the university. Wow. But he had a great influence because he coached me when I was younger, and sparked an interest in me in playing the game of basketball. It opened up a number of doors, many doors that would not have been open for me, but for the fact that that I played basketball, but for the fact that he helped me gain perspective beyond the game itself. He helped me understand at a very early age that this is an avenue that can open up doors. And so we can make it about the game, or we can make it about life. And certainly basketball has taught me many lessons that I carry with me today.
I think there's so much to that. I played sports all my life, but I think, it teaches you so much. I mean, and, being able to walk in and play a pickup game, you learn so much about, how people work together. And if you're good, you can stay on the court. And if it's, nothing's given to you, there's so many life lessons with sports. I even think it helps when you go away, like we did, Kandia, and you get locked up. I think even playing sports and that mentality of walking into an unknown world of, how am I going to adapt to this, is kind of like the locker room and getting on the, in the game. There's a lot to it.
I would not argue one bit with that. I mean, you go in, you make you build relationship, right?
Yeah.
You build trust.
Yeah.
You know, does that guy have the it factor when he walks on the court, right? And so when I walked into Morgantown, West Virginia, on that compound, you know, it became very clear to me that I had to walk in there upright, with a level of confidence, but also, you know, open to building relationships. Right. I mean, that's what happens when you walk out on the court. And it's the same thing that happens when you walk on a compound. You
So
know, those relationships are about your survival, right?
yeah.
And your peace of mind. And so that's, you know, we're social beings, and that's, you know, having those relationships are critical. And I would not have, in fact, I'm in this work today because of those relationships.
Yeah, and I think you know, that's such a big statement, because I sit here today because the thing I was the most surprised about and going to prison is not judging a book by its cover. I want to hear the story, because there's so many fascinating people that I met that I didn't even plan on meeting. You know, you know, I was standing at the gate thinking horrible things were going to happen to me, and the biggest surprise in my life is that people were there to help me, you know, get set up, you know, the next stage. And yeah, I think you do find a different passion once you go through that experience, and want to not waste the experience, I guess it is, to
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
if you can use it to help people. I think that's a big deal. And that's what you're doing, Candia. But I'm curious, when you went through your basketball in
Mhm.
college, were you thinking when you got out that you were going to go back and live the life of a politician guy, or were you thinking other things?
Yeah, well, you know, when you're that age and you're participating in sports, you know, at that level,
Mhm.
there's you're hopeful to be playing basketball beyond college,
Exactly.
right? I mean, that's the goal when you go in, is to play basketball professionally. And so I didn't have any, you know, I didn't have, um, a desire, although I had a backup plan,
Mhm.
uh, to get immediately into politics, and work at the intersection of policy and politics. But reality sets in, right? And I can tell you, in at about the beginning of my senior year is when reality hit that, you know what, I have to really make what was plan B, plan A.
Mhm.
But it still wasn't politics. You know, I had anticipated being in the business world,
Mhm.
um, and then I did just that, while also helping candidates. I was still working in the summer, volunteering with campaigns when I came home from college. But I was, you know, I went right into sales right out of college. And then my college coach, I was two-time captain of our basketball team. And so,
I saw
um,
that.
my college coach called me back,
It's all
um,
coach.
to become an assistant, with him in the program. And what was interesting, I did go back, in that very first year. Uh, we got fired. Uh,
How crazy is that?
and here's what's crazy about it, Brent, is that the coach had a 100% graduation rate.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, in the game, it's about winning games, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so we got fired, but I was fortunate enough to be retained by, the next coach that came in. And in that very second year, we came, I think it was second place in the league.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, we had a really successful year, and he became, you know, a legendary coach. But I can tell you, what was challenging is that I was on the road 100 days out of the year, between games and recruiting, uh,
Mhm.
and having a young family. You know, it was just tough and taxing. And so I got out of, I just felt it was important for me, to center family, and make that, you know, my priority, my family my priority. And so I had to um, yeah, I had to step away from it, and got back into sales. And then it wasn't until 2 years after that that I got into politics, as a
So,
full-time.
so you got into sales after the coaching, and then what was the opportunity that brought you back into politics?
Well, so interestingly enough, I talked about these campaigns that I worked on growing up. Um, well, one of them was Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, who was state rep. We used to work every one of her campaigns. Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick is the mother of Kwame Kilpatrick. So I actually grew up working in politics, playing sports on sports teams, little league sports teams, whether it's basketball, baseball, football, teams with Kwame. We had a relationship and a common interest in politics. And when he was elected youngest mayor, city of Detroit, he thought it was important to bring on a team that was reflective of his energy and values. And so, he brought me in at the time as executive assistant to the chief of staff for the city of Detroit.
How old would you have been at that age when
So,
that happened?
so he was 31, so I was 30. I'm a year younger than
You
he.
guys were young.
Yeah, yeah. So I was 30, and I can tell you, Brett, this is how crazy it was. We would work in the office till about 11 o'clock at night, and the parking garage would close at 11. Right?
Yeah.
We would run downstairs, get our cars out of the parking garage, park the cars on the street, and go back upstairs and work. Not that that was the mandate. That was just the level of energy and enthusiasm we had for what we were doing, to solve a lot of the problems that we were experiencing in the city at the time. And so we were a dedicated group of people who nobody knew our names. We hadn't built the political cachet.
You were the young guys, the young kids on the block.
Right. And so we had a chip on our shoulders that we need to prove ourselves. And we worked every day to do just that, to make changes. And so it was a very, exciting time, high energy. We didn't know what stress looked like. We were just working our butts off, and enjoying, the work that we were doing.
Yeah, I can imagine it. At that age, when you think you can just about accomplish anything, and be in a position like that where things that can actually get accomplished is got to be tons of fun to be able to be in that position to do that.
Yeah, and it was Detroit hadn't seen a new hotel in 20 years, and in the time that we were in office, we're talking 7 new hotel deals were closed in that period, in a 6.5-year period of time. We had built out, a community engagement, community development plan that engaged each community in a very specific way, to have input on what they would like to see in their communities for the purposes of its growth and development. And so we were very, active. Our buses were old and decrepit and out of compliance with, was the ADA compliance. They were out of compliance there. And then we went to Congress and got $82 million to replace our bus fleet. National, we were in the post 9/11 era, right? So, we were able to go to Congress and get $40 million for Homeland Security infrastructure. And so we did, I think, a lot of things that really helped bring the city a long way. Now, we didn't complete the job, but I would say that we did make a great deal of progress in the time that we were there, in spite of the challenges at the end there.
Well, let's talk about that, because when you read through the the history of what was going on, you guys did accomplish a lot, and you were giving people back what they were wanting into the community. And then, there is seems like it always sometimes happens is that you've got um, drama and craziness that transpires. Did you know, uh, Candia, when all this was going on, did you feel it that it was good that something was coming down the pike, that because it was kind of like one over here, one over here, one over here, and then you were left as kind of the person standing here, and then that ended up to be the crazy land deal thing. Did What did that feel like in the world you were in?
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear that there was an active investigation going on, at the time, that it was all happening. And I can tell you, for me personally, when that investigation had happened, I had already made my bad decision well before these investigations had manifested themselves. I would imagine before we knew it, these investigations were happening. And so you could feel the walls sort of caving in on you at the time. And for me, the story for me was, it's one of those things that what happens in the dark will manifest itself in the light. Because, I had built a reputation, if you would, of, one of integrity, in spite of what folks felt about, the mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick, or the administration. Folks sort of separated me,
Yeah.
and said, but that Kandia guy
He's the go-to guy that tells it like it is. Yeah.
and that guy
That's
hasn't.
not just coming from you, Candia. That is, if you read about you, that's part of, yeah.
And I will state that, the sort of Shakespearean comedy of it all is that, I played on that, right? And betrayed the trust of the hardworking folks who at the city, trying to keep the lights on and do bring a hard day's work with integrity, for the pay that they were earning. I betrayed their trust, as well as the citizens, and everybody that I worked with every day. And so I had to come to grips with that, and having betrayed their trust, trust that they often put in me, and that I don't take lightly.
Yeah. And I mean, I had a situation where it was the company, and we were a national company, and you could feel,
Yeah.
every day you could feel that you were under siege, and you didn't know. You fought, and you knew that, probably wasn't going to be enough, but you felt thinking that there was going to be something that could be worked out, figured out.
Yeah, and everybody always said, they're waiting for another shoe to drop, and
Right.
and it just seemed that whether it was at the city council level, or in a department, or in the administration, as we say, the 11th floor, that's where the mayor's office
Yeah.
was. On the 11th floor, I mean, everyone was just waiting for a shoe to drop,
Shoe to drop.
because I mean, if you were to take a look at the history and put it all on a timeline,
Yeah.
I mean, it was happening one after the other.
Well, that's what it looks like. That's how it reads. And for you personally, Candia, what was the timeline? What was the investigation timeline that you were going through? And I'm sure, I don't know how old your kids were at the time. Mine were teenagers. I don't know how old your daughters were, but how did you cope with all that?
Yeah. So my daughters, I had an infant, at the time, and then one was in just out, and then two were in middle school.
Okay.
At the time that this all was happening.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting is the bad decision I made around this land deal happened in 2006. they came knocking on the doors. The feds came knocking on the door in 2009.
Okay.
Um,
But 3 years had passed.
right. 3 years had passed. And quite frankly, you know, I thought I had,
Moved past that.
you know what, I won't do that one again, right?
Exactly.
Because, you know, I could see all of this happen in 2009. And so 2000, as you know, 2008, the mayor resigned from office in the summer of 2008. So this happened in 2009. I called myself trying to move on, only to have that past catch up to me. And interestingly enough, I was out, it was 8 in the morning. I was sitting with a person who was contemplating running for office for city council. And my wife calls me, and I'm like, she's calling me. She knows I'm in a meeting, right? And so I hit, I deny the call. And then she calls me right back, and then calls me right back again. I said, well, let me step aside and take this call. And so when I take the call, she says, Kandia, what in the heck did you do? Now, Britt, she didn't use heck. I'm just,
Sure.
I know it's a family show, so I won't use the words that so she questions me. I said, what are you talking about? She says, the FBI just showed up at the door here. I said, well, what happened? She said, I told him to get the heck out of here. Again, she didn't use heck. I said, I got nothing for you. But what in the heck? She said, you need to come home. And so, I wrapped up the conversation I was having with the prospective candidate, and then came home, and then I called my attorney from there, and so we began, the process of me accepting responsibility for the bad decision I made.
Yeah, and that's how that starts. Did you immediately, Candia, feel like you were going to, fall on the sword and do a plea bargain, or where were you in your mind without all that going on?
Yeah, so I didn't really. Yeah, so I guess fall on the sword would assume that I'm taking it for someone else, and I can tell you my thing was, what I did was not connected to what anybody else was doing.
Right.
I felt like I was, even in the moment, doing something and sneaking behind everybody else's back, and nobody would investigate me because I'm quote unquote the guy that folks like. Yep. Right. I mean, when I say, Brent, I played on that, I really did. And so I saw mine individually, I saw mine as being separate. Now, I do believe that, well, given the questions that they asked that I had no answers for, they thought that this was all a part of a larger
thing. Yeah.
Enterprise.
They want to connect the dots to everybody, right?
Yeah. And so mine was not at all that. It was a separate. And so that's how my attorney and I approached it. And so I accepted responsibility for my action. It's got nothing to do with what anybody else has done. This is Kandia saying I did it with the intentions of putting this behind me as quickly as I can so that I can move forward.
How quickly did that happen? Like when you said with your attorney, hey, we're going to accept responsibility. How long did it take you to get to the point where you're standing at the gates of wherever? What was the time period of that?
Yeah, so 2009 is when that process started. I think it was about 2010. It was 2010 when I was, and this was crazy to me, Brent, to self-report, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's weird. It's one of the weirdest things.
I gotta take myself to prison.
Yeah. I'm going to prison today.
Right. That was crazy, right? And so it was 2010 that in fact, it was the fall of 2010, late summer, early fall of 2010 that I reported to Morgantown,
Well,
West Virginia.
tell me about it, Candia, because everybody's got a different type of experience, but you're going in there, you're a guy that has been in the know of politics, and you're walking now into a federal prison. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, I can tell you it's a surreal experience. You know, I going in and at that check-in point and it feeling very invasive,
Yeah.
um, violating. I mean, it's almost, it was like when you take a look back at it, it was an indoctrination
Yeah.
so that you know that this is really what this is going to be about. You got no power. I don't care where you came from, that there's no power that
You
you
can
have.
almost feel it like coming off your skin. Like they prisonize you and it feels like your freedom's just falling off of you.
Right, right. And then they give you these khakis with these flat shoes,
Yeah.
flat cheap shoes that you throw on,
No
right?
way to look good in those.
Right. And then you know all the rest of your gear with the big orange hat that goes along with it, and the brogans, and so and then you walk across the compound, you know, with folks, it feeling like folks looking at you. Okay, who's the
Well, they
new?
are. I mean, that's one thing you figure out, because once I was there, when somebody came in, yeah, who's the new guy? What's he look like? He's entering our world.
Right.
I'm just going to be there for a day. This guy's coming in for a while.
And folks size you up on multiple levels. So
Yeah.
walking through the compound, and so what I noticed is that, see, in Morgantown, West Virginia, they had an indoor basketball court, right, indoor gym facility. So I walked through there, of course, to check it out and see what the competition was going to look like for me. And folks were sizing you up then. Okay, this guy's 6'4",
Uh-huh.
got a little bit of a walk to him. He might not be bad. So they would pass you the ball so that you could shoot it. And then they can size up. Okay, is this guy okay? He might not be too bad, because it was just around basketball season that I got there, and so they're sizing you up at there. And then when you get to your bunk, they're sizing you up when you're walking through, over to, and ours was, I don't know about where you were, and were you in Leavenworth?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
just like a big open
yeah, it's like Army
room.
barracks,
Yeah.
right? With a bunch of bunk beds
A lot
and
of bunk
cubes.
beds. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're checking you out as you're walking over to your bunk, and even your bunkie is trying to get a sense of who is this guy now invading my space. And then you have these rules. I can tell you, common courtesy is very important in that space.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize, even if you're chewing with your mouth open, it's an expression of disrespect.
Yes.
Uh,
Respect is such a big deal. And
yeah,
they give you the thing of the prison rules, but you've got to learn the unwritten prison rules to survive
unwritten
what
prison
the
rules,
world is.
right? And if you are automatically going into a minimum and you didn't work your way down, then they really get upset with you. You know, you come in here, you don't know the rules. Like, how am I supposed to know the rules? I didn't work my help a brother out. Uh,
Exactly.
but I will state,
Yeah.
some of the most thoughtful and kindest and most intelligent and most creative people I've ever met in my life were in prison.
I agree with you. Yep.
And what I learned is that, these guys, no matter what led them to their incarceration, everybody wants the same thing that everybody outside those walls want for their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of their exposure in life on how to get to that place.
Absolutely.
And so often people are not exposed to the same opportunities that others have had in their lives. And so they go down the road that they know, and it's survival for a lot of folks. But at the end of the day, what folks really want is the same thing. They want some security. They want financial integrity. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want to support their families. They want to live in community, in relationship with people. And that's really what it
That's
all boils
true.
down to.
Yeah, and you find that out by you're living in close quarters with these people,
Mhm.
and then you do find stories of, you wonder how in the world that person survived to this point,
Mhm.
and how they didn't have any opportunities. I think some people, maybe it was Glenn Martin that said that, or maybe it was Lewis Reed who was talking, and he said, to give somebody a second chance, maybe they didn't even get a first chance in the first place.
Exactly.
They're just
Exactly.
looking for a fair chance. But
Yeah. It sounds like a Lewis Reedism.
I think it is.
That's my guy. That sounds like my brother there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and he's right. He's right. I talked about the relationships that I built with folks while in prison that has me in this work. And what you just, you stated about second chances versus a fair chance reminds me of one of the guys that really inspired me to be here. We were in the visiting room, and his family, including his young kids, had come to visit. And he was a tough guy. This was his second bit, and his family, his boys, two young boys, were just jumping all over him, playing with him, and he was just having a ball. You didn't see that on the compound. This was a very different guy. That toughness had gone away. He was loving on these kids, hugging them. I mean, they were jumping. I mean, they had the visiting room. It was their playground, and he was enjoying himself. And at the end of the visitation, we're all standing in the line there. We all have to line up to go back to the compound.
Makes you feel kind of prisoner too. That whole thing. Yeah.
Pardon?
That whole thing kind of makes you feel like you're okay. I've
Exactly.
joined my wife and kids, and now I'm lining up as a prisoner to head back into market as a prisoner.
Right. And so the family is still there, right? And so they're watching you line up, and the kids had experienced this before. So dad is now about to leave, and they're bawling, and they're grabbing him at his ankles as he's standing there in line. I mean, it just took all he could to not cry. And I could see a tear drop, right? And him turn his head to wipe his eyes. And so we get back, and we're in the same unit. And for like 2 weeks, he's in this self-imposed isolation. He's only going to eat and coming back. And so I walk over to him. I said, man, his name was Herb. I said, Herb, man, this has got to be it for you. I mean, you can't come back. Those kids, they're dependent on you, and they really love you. This you can't come back here again. And so then he looks up at me. He says, Milt, they go by last names, by the way. Yeah, everybody they go by your last. Milt, I'm gonna do my best, but I can't promise you nothing. I said, well, what do you mean? How can you not make that promise? He said, well, the first time I got out, I had committed to never coming back here. And it was okay for me to work those janitorial jobs, but while I get on my feet, he said, but every job I applied for, I got turned down. Nobody would hire me. He said, so I had to go back to do what I knew how to do because that janitorial job wasn't paying the bills. He said, listen, Milt, my uncles, they hustled. My mother, she hustled. My cousins, they all hustled. And he said, if I knew my father, I'm sure he was a hustler, but I never knew him.
Oh, well,
He said the only hustling he did was he got
get
out of
out of
my life.
town.
Right. And I mean, and those are his words. And so I went back to my bunk and I was mad. I'm like, he can't do these kids like that. And so then I came home and I served my time. I'm ready to get back into society. I pulled out my notepad of all the people who said, when you return home, give me a call. That was about 25 people. So I made all those calls. I applied for 50 jobs online.
Mhm.
I didn't get one call back for an interview.
Yep.
Right? That was sobering. Of the 25 calls that I made, of all the 25 people, while I was liaison to city council, deputy mayor, chief of staff, helped all of these people move projects that they wanted through the city government.
That was important to them.
Exactly. I got only 2 callbacks. 2 callbacks. One of those callbacks ultimately led to the relationship that I built with then Congressman Gary Peters.
Mm-hmm.
But as much as I didn't think Herb had understood or that Herb was out of touch, it was that experience that helped me to learn that I was out of touch.
Yeah.
And that there's a group of people who could utilize the experience that I've had in government, working at the intersection of policy and politics, to move the kind of policies that will make their lives better and make for a successful transition, should we do all that we need to do, make for a successful transition back into society for them.
That's such a great story, Candia, that you just shared the whole scope there, because I think that's you nailed it. It's when you're in, and I was going to ask you, like, what your strategies while you were in. What did you do while you were in? Did you, because I can't remember the time that you had. Was it less than 3 years? 3 year sentence?
Yeah, my story internally was not really sensational. I mean, that it was it
That's a
I
good
was,
thing.
yeah, I mean, exactly. So it wasn't so much my story, my personal experience, that drove me to be in this work. It was the men that I
Yeah, well, I think what you just said though puts so much emphasis on how hard it is for those who really are trying. And you said most everyone wants the same thing. It's, can they grit it out enough to stay with it, because that janitorial job and getting another janitorial job, and then looking at where you were and what
Mhm.
you were doing, and the running things, running cities of things, and you're just desperately trying to get somebody to call you back
Right,
for a job interview.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I just felt like if I could just get 2 of these interviews, I could,
Lock
I
it
could
up.
make the kind of impression
Yep.
that makes it difficult for them to say no to me, right? I mean, to me, it's out being in sales. It's easy to say no to the company, but it was always my confidence that it's tough to say no to Candia. If I get in front of you and we have this conversation, I'm gonna make it tough for you to say no to me. You can say no to the product when we send all the bells and whistles of the product to you, but it's gonna be hard to say no to me. So, but I couldn't get there. I just couldn't get to that point. But you asked the question, the things that I did while incarcerated, right? I worked with a lot of folk on their business plans. A lot of guys had hopes and dreams for when they got out of what they were going to do. And so, I helped guys build out their business plans. I help, people understand the importance of conflict resolution versus, the knee-jerk reaction and we all often want to react, right? Even when I'm driving, I feel like lashing out at some folk.
My wife's good at that. She
Yeah,
turns it
and I
into
always tell her,
kind
and
of
I
way.
always say, so my wife does the same, Britt. And I say, listen, that person is gone. They ain't even thinking about you, but here you are, mad and ready to, go crazy. Why don't we just keep it moving here? But helping with conflict resolutions. And I didn't so much build curricula for classes, but I would, I was often the guest
Mhm.
lecturer for some of the classes, which, let me just say, there's such a hunger for growth and development for people who are incarcerated that in the absence of the BOP bringing classes,
Yeah.
we were in there building curricula for classes. And,
That's that's such a great point. Such a great point because I know one of the things you've talked about is the First Step Act that you were very involved in helping get that done. Now it's all in place, but we can't get it staffed, can't get the things that are supposed to be done to get the people to get their credits and all those things. So much of that, if they even talk about staffing. Well, why not take some of the people that the Candias of the world and let them teach the curriculum that will help these people get the credits they need to get through the First Step Act. Those are, I mean, those we have it staffed.
Mhm,
They're
mhm,
not going
mhm.
anywhere.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, and well, what's interesting is even before the First Step Act, right? These classes were happening, and now they're being forced to accept because of the staffing issue and the demand for implementation of the First Step Act, is that they're now allowing for these classes, certain classes that meet the criteria to, make allowances for credits. So the good thing is that is starting to happen more and more because of the, what I would call chronic staffing shortages, that not only put folk at risk of, for not having opportunity, but it's really a safety risk, um, not having the staffing levels there.
yeah. Well, Candia, because when you got out and then you finally get this opportunity, can you walk us through that? How you felt about that? What it was? How it happened? Because that really kind of sets you in play back into your world, but you had a different passion.
Mhm.
You had this inner feeling that I'm going to do some things and change some things. It was a little bit different than before you went in.
Yeah, and I can tell you, man, this is, um, when I came out, I had no thought about going back into politics, to be
Mhm.
honest with you. And the two people that I referenced that actually answered the phone and were active participants, had presented opportunities to me that I wasn't ready for, um, and and was still punishing myself for the bad decision and feeling bad for myself, and feeling like in some of these cases not worthy.
Kind of like the imposter syndrome. I'm
Yeah,
not supposed to be here. Yeah.
and it was something when I look back at it, didn't even recognize myself because, you know, being born and raised in Detroit, where you see, unlike a lot of cities, you see examples of what Black leadership can look like, and your role and responsibility and the opportunities you have for you to, when you see a Coleman Young or Clyde Cleveland, who's a councilman, or a Charles Diggs, who was a congressman, or a John Conyers, who's a congressman. When you're seeing those folks and attorneys, who are multiple, types of practices, from defense to municipal bonds to, general practitioners. I mean, when you see that every day, you feel a sense of belonging no matter where you are.
Mm.
And so to be in this space where now you don't feel worthy, or you have this imposter syndrome, um, And it happened in a way, Brent, that I didn't even recognize it when I was in that space.
Sure.
But I just kept thinking, okay, I'm not worthy of these opportunities.
Yeah.
And so what happened was I was sitting on the porch, and the gentleman that I used to work with at the city, who didn't get in the kind of trouble that I got in, had built his was it call it a political, he's a political consultant, but he does more than that. So he's communications consultant, political consultant. He like builds out campaigns. And I was sitting there on the porch, and he also lived up the street from me.
Okay.
So he saw me. He said, "Man, I keep driving by here and I'm seeing you on the porch. And this is a waste. It's a waste of your talents for you to just be sitting on the porch. And, we need you in the game." And then one day he called and said, "Hey, listen, I got this charity thing that I'm doing downtown, and I need your help as a bartender."
Okay.
I've never been a bartender, but he brought me a black vest. He said, "All you need is some slacks. Now some black slacks, but here's the vest I need you to wear." So I go and I show up, and the folks who came in from the charity event were staffers for the Gary Peters campaign for Congress. And out of that, they asked him some questions. Okay, who is that guy? And then as they started to see who that guy was, and as he started to tell them the story of the guy, they were like, "Ooh, that guy's kind of that guy's kind of mysterious." But then he seems to be a pretty nice guy.
Hi. Yeah.
So they then invited me to work for the campaign.
Wow.
Right. And so, but I would put my toe in the water, and then I would step back, put my toe in the water, I would step back. And at a point, the campaign manager said, "Hey, listen, you either have to show up and we can depend on you, or, we can't have you on the books as being hired, because we really need, we need you to be an active participant in this campaign if that's what you're going to be." And so I did make the full-fledged commitment, but it was not easy because it was starting over.
Yeah.
I didn't come in as the political advisor. I didn't come in as the policy advisor. I didn't come in as the deputy campaign manager or campaign manager. I came in as a canvasser.
Mhm.
So here I am,
Took you all the way back to your baseball days.
starting exactly right back to where I started, right? And so every day that I would go to the territory that I was assigned to, Brent, I would sit in the car for 20 minutes, agonizing about what I had in front of me.
Hmm.
And then 30-second pep talk, get get yourself together and get out here and do this. This isn't just about the canvassing. This is about, who you, and every day I would do that.
Yeah.
And I would go door to door. And even though I was 20 to 30 minutes behind the other person starting,
Mhm.
every day my numbers were higher than everybody else
Mhm.
who were out there canvassing. And the feedback was, that I was inputting was more substantial than everybody else who was out there canvassing with me at the same time. And after he won office, he asked me if I would be interested in working in his official office.
It's huge.
Yeah, and I will tell you, one of the conditions was I need for you to be out in the community, sharing your story,
Mhm.
also encouraging the young kids
Mhm.
to avoid the pitfalls that lead to incarceration.
Yeah.
And that was hard because it took me about 3 months of being on staff before I did my first meeting.
Yeah.
And every time the congressman would come back to the district, he would say, have you been out there yet? Have you been out there yet? And then at one point he said, Kandia, these kids absolutely need you. And the very first time that I went out there, Brent, I had a canned sort of story to tell. And it was one of those, if I could just reach one of you, I've done my job type stories. Right. But when those kids walked into that auditorium, man, and I could see little mini me's coming into that auditorium. I mean, just something transpired. And the very thing that I prepared, I didn't utter one word of that.
That's incredible.
Right. Because I had avoided, because in all that I prepared, I had avoided the story. But it included not only the story, but it also opened up with, if I miss any one of you, then I failed you all. Right. Yeah. And because it's crazy to me when we were growing up, right? If I could just reach one. Sure. Well, is that ever a success? When has some person ever just simply done their job if they reached one?
Right.
Well, even baseball has a higher, your batting average is,
yeah.
Right. If you hit it 3 times out of 10, then that's a good batting average, right? But if you have 45 kids and you only reach one,
right,
you've done your job. No, I think you ought to be fired at that point.
You need to reach a few more.
Right. So yeah, and so and it started with that, and me being open and candid about not just the the bad decision, but all the things that led to the bad decision.
Right.
Buying into you're the greatest, buying into this notion that, nobody has ever done it as well as you. Leaning in on reputation as opposed to leaning in on character, right? And so, it was all the things. So I didn't just talk about the bad decisions, but it was the things that led up to the bad decisions. A steak dinner wasn't illegal. Concert tickets weren't illegal, but it was priming me, right, for that ultimate, hey, would you take this money in exchange for this, right? And so all of that led to the bad decision that I made.
That's so great, though, that you had somebody. It's almost like an accountability guy. This just, hey, have you been out there yet? Have you? And then when you went out there, Kandia, you loved it. And I can see just you talking about it now. I like to go and do that. I was just doing it the other night to Fordham University. It was on a virtual call, but I love that moment. It almost feels like sports when you're taking the court. You get that adrenaline flow, and then you get the Q&A, and you feel like you've connected. But being able to use your experience, like when I talk about the moment, if I could have this moment back, and then this moment was another moment, and then this moment. So when you get into these moments, think about them. Don't just walk over them.
Right.
And I can tell you just talking about that, it heals you therapeutically to go out and do that, which is a big deal, because you're in a world, Kandia, where thank God you're in the position you're in. I mean, how inspired Sabrina was that you took the time to come and see her in Kansas City. And she's, all about this halfway house there. And, but you're in a position where you can inspire people to take action. And, that's in this world that we live in with, we say that we're branded for life as ex-felons. We are. But I think the more that we band together as a group to create a bigger voice for change, is what, needs to be done. And with what you're doing and just the fact that we're going out and speaking to kids and getting that back and forth and creating maybe a different generation of what people are thinking when they go into it. That's a huge deal. Huge deal.
And it's It was very healing. You know, I felt a, you know, a big weight fall off of my shoulders. And I will tell you, I'm not here today but for that experience. Not just that I can say that I work for Congressman Gary Peters and thus can be a government affairs director now, right? I mean, because that's usually the path for someone who works for a congressman is they go with become a lobbyist, government affairs, they become a politician. So, but it was that as we talked about earlier, that controlling the narrative is part of it, but the other part is showing up and being genuine about who you are and what your life experience is, but utilizing that and seeing the light bulb go off in these kids. Like I was expected, I tell the story being at the school, right? So I was expected on a career day to be there for, you know, 2 hours. I didn't get out of there until 4 o'clock, the end of the school day. They kept asking me to go to this next class and go to that next class and go to that next class. But you also said something important here, and that is, you know, there being a community of incarcerated people working together, right, to make change. Every time someone says that, I'm reminded of the Neo song, right? I'm a movement by myself, but I'm a force when we're together. You make me better. You make me better. So being in community is what makes us a force, right? It's the relationships that you're building that matters. We can't get any of this done without being in community, without building the kind of power that forces people to bring us to the table. We're not just simply being invited to the table. Power doesn't invite powerless to the table. It's because we're in community and you're seen as a force. That's how you get that invitation to the table, is because, man, this person's powerful. He's got the backing of all of these people, and you're not going to build it on your own. You build it in community. And so, you know, Sabrina and I having a conversation about the need for a halfway house in Kansas City, which is ridiculous. How do you not have a halfway house?
Oh, no, it doesn't make any sense.
A major
Driving to Topeka, Kansas.
Right. So you're saying you want to set people up for a successful transition back in society, but yet you have to drive, you know, an hour and a half to the nearest halfway house for reporting. And so now what if you don't have a vehicle?
Yeah.
Right?
Easily could happen. It's very hard to get credit when you get out of prison just to go get a car.
Exactly. And so as much as, you know, connecting with Sabrina was a good initial step, I can tell you. She's reached out to labor unions. She's reached out to federal judges. She's reached out to halfway house operators. She's reached out to harm reduction centers. I mean, she's action. Exactly. And in building community, she's building power to make change, to have an impact within her domain.
Yeah.
And that really is, like I say, it generally isn't about me. It's about the relationships I build that really drives me to be in this work.
It's great work, though.
Yeah.
It's great work, Kandia. I always ask this to people, you know, at the end of the show, and you've got such an interesting journey that you've been on.
Are we at the end already?
Oh,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We're not at the end of the journey.
No, I'm saying the end of the show.
Oh, end of the show.
We at the end of the show already?
But what do you think's your greatest takeaway through everything you've been through?
My greatest takeaway.
because you can do a lot.
Yeah. So here is what I've come to realize in this work is that there is this is hard work. And I will state that as a person of faith, this is sacred work. And I don't take the responsibility in being in this work lightly. And thus I share a sacred trust with those who have gone before me. And pursuant to that sacred trust, I share a sacred trust with those who will come after me. And so it's important for me to build on what those who have gone before me have built.
Yeah.
Right. Recognizing that I might not, quote unquote, get to the promised land as Moses didn't get to the promised land. But if I can get us closer, then I can pass it on to the next generation, right? That will take it to where, to that promised land. And so I just recognize that for as long as I'm in this work, I may not see all the benefits of it. I can change. As hard as it is to change laws, it's even tougher to change the culture, right? So I can change 20 laws today, but until we change the culture, that's a longer, protracted struggle that, quite frankly, I recognize that I might have to pass on to the next generation in my lifetime.
I love that for so many layers of reasons, because, taking something from one step and building up to the next step for the next person to take it. If you don't have that happening, it all falls down like a house of cards. So everybody's got to keep building on it. Candy, if somebody wants to get a hold of you,
pardon?
What's the best way to reach out? Is it through dream.org?
Yeah, they can. My email is Kandia, Kandia, at dream.org. I don't know if they can see it on the screen here, prominently displayed, but it's Kandia at dream.org.
I'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah. That's the quickest way to reach out. At the center of all of our campaigns are people who are directly impacted. We do everything from engage our empathy network, which is, again, a community of impacted leaders, engage them in cohort trainings. Then we have, in fact, I have a training this evening with people who are getting ready for their local or state campaigns. Everything from policy trainings to telling your story to organizing. We have a whole curriculum on for people who are impacted by our criminal legal system, directly impacted by our criminal legal system. I mean, we're all impacted by it, but those who are considered directly impacted by our criminal legal system. So again, at the center of all of our campaigns are people who are directly impacted.
Which is such a needed thing and so important. And I think that's why a dream.org organization is just one of the best out there doing what needs to be done. And Candia, man, keep doing what you're doing. You're such a great voice to have. You talk about a village and a movement and a community, and having you with your experience, using everything in your brain to get to the next step is such a big deal for people like me and Sabrina and everybody else that's in this big world of ours. So hope you keep doing everything you're doing, man.
Well, Brent, I want to thank you for not just having me, but for lifting up these stories. And they're not just simply stories, but they're opportunities for us all. Those certainly opportunities for you and I, meaning us, to engage in this work, but also for others to see what's going on and get engaged in the work, because it really is going to take all of us moving in the same direction and in unison to make the change here we want to see. And quite frankly, this country needs to see.
Oh, man, for sure. For anybody out there, I appreciate that, Candia, by the way. If you want to get a hold of me, it's brentcassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY, even though I'd like to be Sean and David Cassidy. It's just spelled wrong. And guys, I really appreciate everybody. There's been a surge of reviews on Apple that is great, because for some reason that just affects the algorithm and puts the show on steroids. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that, because I know it's kind of a hassle to do and click through all that and do that. So I appreciate it. If you're looking for a book out there, hey, it's Christmas time. Well, it's really Thanksgiving, but Christmas is coming. Go to Amazon.com, get Nightmare Success. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Kandia Milton, man, appreciate you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate this conversation. I look forward to us having a relationship beyond this discussion, and continue the great work in lifting up stories of folks who are directly impacted by our criminal legal system.
That'll do it for today. Nightmare Success in and out.